I feel so painful recently because the uh, coronavirus cases in the United States has been growing rapidly during the past 2 weeks. Um, so I feel the whole nation is suffering, and furthermore, the whole world is suffering. Now it's like over 180 countries have coronavirus cases, and many people have died, and many families have been broken, and the medical workers, they're overwhelmed. The hospitals are overwhelmed. So the whole economy has been halted. So it's a very very troublesome situation, or it's a very dire situation in this country and in many parts of the world. So I feel so heavy recently in my heart, and but I think when I looking into the future, I think just like as a person, we need to grow from our painful failure or painful mistakes. After those painful mistakes, hopefully we can learn a thing or two to prevent ourselves from doing the same mistake again in the future. And that can be the silver lining of all the sufferings we have due to our own failure, our own mistakes. So if I can humbly suggest the whole Western world or the free world in some way, there is at least one thing I hope the free world can learn, is that you cannot be cut off from a suffering nation, or from a authoritarian regime totally. So maybe in the past, many people will think we can do business with China, with a brutal regime such as China, as long as the brutalness of the government is contained within its own border. We can still do business, we can still set up factories, we can earn money from the market, and we can import their goods. So as long as their influence is contained within their own border, it doesn't matter. We can earn money from the business, from the trade. And in some way, I think the Western world has been appeasing China so vastly. And I understand there is some logic behind that, because there is a theory that as the economy of a country grows, as the market is more and more open in the society, the mid the mid class grows, and the society will be more open, will be politically more open. So that's a hope, and that's a theory, and that has happened in some countries before China. So I think that is part of the reason why the Western world welcomed China to join the WTO and to have more trade, more economic connections to the world. And that is the hope. That could be a win-win if that really happens in the end. But I think, as we can see right now, the economic build-up of China doesn't necessarily allow it to be a more open society. To the contrary, it has become a much more closed society in many ways. It has treated its own citizens and the minorities, and no matter it's political minorities or the religious people in the country, more and more harshly, and they are using their technical strengths to implement more surveillance program and more effectively control their citizens. and also they are exporting those technologies to some of like some other authoritarian countries. So I had a I had a classmates many years ago who was from a country in Africa. I won't name the country, but like Chinese government has a lot of infrastructure uh, projects in that country and help that country build up their basic infrastructures. But in exchange of uh, more political and economic preference to Chinese government, at the same time, the Chinese government is propping up the local corrupted government officials and the semi like dictatorship of the country. And you know, America and other Western countries, they are establishing some principles for the African countries to be able to receive the donations, to receive the support. That is like you must have a you must reduce your corruption. You must like honor human rights, so on and so forth. But Chinese government, they don't have any strings attached to their support in one way. Like it's not like there's nothing like uh, attached for their requirement as such, but instead they are building up the authoritarian regime, and they are exporting oppression, exporting censorship, the technology of censorship to those countries. So in that case, the Western world will lose, you know. So if you are a dictator in an African country or in any country, in any part of the world, who will you do business with? You will of course do business with China. But before, China didn't have that capacity to export so many technologies, so many like money to the world, to those countries. But now, because it's richer, it's more developed, it can influence more countries, and that can alter the political balance in many continents in the whole world. So that's very worrisome to me. So I think the silver lining of this pandemic, of this absolutely horrible pandemic, at least I can see one silver lining is it makes the whole world realize that you can never be totally insulated from such horrible regime. Before, you would think like if they censor their own citizen, it has nothing to do with me. We still have the freedom of speech. We still have free elections. We still have freedom of publication of news. Like I can still have my own health system in my own country. But right now, what happened? Because of the censorship, because of the lack of freedom of press, freedom of speech, the situation exploded in China, the coronavirus situation, and that virus cannot be contained within that country, and the WHO is corrupted by Chinese government, and the world organizations such like WHO cannot function as it's supposed to be. So that so you are connected with the people who is oppressed by this regime, and now you are suffering from the same reason, is the like untransparency or the lack of transparency in Chinese government. You are suffering from the censorship Chinese government has been doing to its own citizen. You have been suffering from the same thing as the Chinese people are suffering. So I have read many news in the past 2 to 3 days that like government officials from Australia, from India, from Great Britain, from Brazil, they have been more and more aware of this connectedness and are more and more strong strongly against such practice of Chinese government, and they're trying to connect their suffering with the lack of transparency in China, and they're requesting the Chinese government to take responsibility of this pandemic and open their society more, and that's a good thing. If more and more people can have this opinion, can put more pressure on Chinese government, it may change a little, and it may gradually change more in the coming years. So I hope that the free society, the free world, can unite with each other, can be united together to put more pressure on Chinese government in the future, because you are not separated from Chinese people. You are not separated from a evil authoritarian regime, a Nazi regime in making. You cannot be cut out. You have learned that from Second World War, but you have trusted China more than it deserved. So I hope more people can wake up and good things can come out of it in the end. See you next time.